A nurse found bound, drugged, and dead. Was it murder, suicide, or something even stranger? The case of Cindy James is one of Canada's most baffling and controversial true crime mysteries. For nearly 7 years, Cindy reported being stalked, harassed, and attacked by an unknown assailant, to be found dead under eerie and suspicious circumstances in 1989. Her hands and feet were bound, she had a lethal dose of drugs in her system, and yet there were no clear signs of struggle or evidence pointing to a killer. The investigation left behind far more questions than answers. Cindy's story isn't just a tale of fear, it's a case that divided public opinion and frustrated investigators. Some believe she was a genuine victim of a sadistic tormentor. Others suspected she was orchestrating the incidents herself due to deep psychological distress. Her death ruled not determinable, only added to the uncertainty. Today, we explore one of Canada's most perplexing true crime cases, one that challenges our understanding of victimhood, mental health, and justice. Through facts, theories, and unanswered questions, we'll unravel the haunting mystery of Cindy James. Cindy James, born Cindy Hack in 1944, grew up in a stable, middle-class family in British Columbia. From an early age, she was known for being bright, well-mannered, and deeply caring, a personality that naturally led her into a life of service. Friends and family described her as gentle and compassionate, but also someone who kept her deeper emotions tightly guarded. She wasn't one to openly share her struggles, preferring to maintain a composed, helpful presence. After completing her education, Cindy pursued a career in nursing, eventually specializing in pediatric care. She worked with children who had emotional and behavioral challenges, and was widely respected for her patience and dedication. Her work was demanding, but Cindy seemed driven by a deep sense of purpose, often going beyond expectations to support her young patients. In 1966, at the age of 22, Cindy married Dr. Roy Makepeace, a psychiatrist 18 years her senior. Their relationship began with promise, offering Cindy both companionship and stability. But over time, cracks began to show. The significant age gap, differences in temperament, and growing tensions behind closed doors took a toll on their marriage. After 16 years, they separated in 1982. It was shortly after this separation that Cindy's life began to spiral into fear and uncertainty. Although Cindy projected an image of control and composure, there were early signs that she had quietly battled emotional difficulties. She reportedly struggled with anxiety and periods of depression, issues that would become more significant as her story unfolded. At this stage, her psychological history was not well known or deeply examined, but it would later play a critical role in how both the police and public interpreted her increasingly strange and alarming experiences. Not long after her separation from Dr. Roy Makepeace, Cindy James began reporting a series of deeply disturbing events. It started with anonymous phone calls, sometimes threatening, other times filled with eerie silence or strange noises. Then came the letters. Handwritten and anonymous, they were often filled with crude language and sinister undertones, warning her that she was being watched or would be harmed. Cindy was terrified, convinced someone was targeting her, but she had no idea who or why. As time went on, the incidents escalated. She told police that prowlers were lurking outside her home at night. She reported broken windows, cut phone lines, and strange noises around her property. On several occasions, Cindy said someone had broken in and moved items around, small but deliberate signs that someone had invaded her space. But the most frightening moments were the alleged physical attacks. She claimed to have been strangled with a cord, injected with unknown substances, and in some cases found semi-conscious with bruises and cuts on her body. In one instance, she was discovered with a nylon stocking tightly knotted around her neck. Cindy reported every incident to the police, over 100 in total, but their investigations led nowhere. No fingerprints. No conclusive evidence. Surveillance of her house failed to catch any suspects. Despite the severity of the events, investigators began to doubt her story. The scenes often looked staged. Injuries were real, but they couldn't determine who inflicted them more, even if they might have been self-inflicted. Cindy's unwillingness to name a suspect, even when pressed, only deepened their suspicion. Over time, a rift formed between public opinion and the official investigation. Some believed Cindy was a genuine victim, too frightened to speak the full truth, possibly trying to protect someone she knew. Others, including some law enforcement officials, began to see her as a troubled woman orchestrating a complex hoax, perhaps driven by a psychological disorder. The idea that she could be simultaneously both victim and fabricator further blurred the lines. Cindy's life became a cycle of fear, doubt, and disbelief. The more she insisted she was in danger, the more skeptics questioned her credibility. And yet, the events were undeniably real to her hand, in some cases, physically visible. Whether the threat came from someone else or from within, one thing was clear. Cindy James was in a state of deep psychological and emotional distress. Now, no one seemed able to help her or stop what was coming. As the months turned into years, the harassment Cindy James reported only intensified. The strange phone calls and anonymous letters continued, but the incidents grew more violent and bizarre. Cindy was found tied up on multiple occasions, sometimes in public places, other times inside her own home. In one chilling incident, she was discovered in her garage, hands and feet bound, with a nylon stocking wrapped tightly around her neck. She claimed she had been attacked from behind and knocked unconscious, though she couldn't describe the attacker. The most alarming escalation came in the form of arson. Cindy's house was firebombed twice. In one instance, a Molotov cocktail had been thrown into her home while she was inside. She managed to escape, and police arrived quickly, but again, there were no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no solid leads. The sheer boldness of the attacks made it hard to believe she could have staged them herself, yet there was still no proof that anyone else was responsible. In another case, her basement was set ablaze, and investigators found signs that it had been started from within. Skeptics in the police force began suggesting that Cindy might be orchestrating these events herself, possibly as a cry for help. In response to ongoing suspicion, Cindy agreed to take a polygraph test. The results were inconclusive. Noted signs of extreme anxiety and emotional distress, which made it difficult to interpret the findings accurately. Around the same time, she underwent psychiatric evaluations, which pointed to deep psychological trauma. While some doctors believed she might be suffering from dissociative episodes or a stress-induced disorder, others were hesitant to make definitive claims without clearer evidence. Despite police surveillance efforts, stackouts, wiretaps, and neighborhood canvassing, no suspects were ever identified. No attacker was ever seen. Officers admitted that while some incidents seemed staged, others were too elaborate and risky to easily fake. Cindy herself seemed increasingly isolated, exhausted, and trapped in a nightmare that neither she nor law enforcement could escape. As the situation escalated, so did the divide between those who believed her and those who didn't. Friends and family remained supportive, insisting she was being targeted and lived in constant fear. But many in the police force saw her as a deeply troubled woman, possibly suffering from a mental illness that drove her to dangerous extremes. Regardless of which version of the truth was real, one thing was becoming unmistakably clear: Cindy James was unraveling, and the situation was headed toward a tragic end. In May 1989, after nearly 7 years of reported harassment and escalating incidents, Cindy James vanished. On the evening of May 25th, she was scheduled to meet a friend for dinner. When she failed to show up, concern grew quickly. Her car was later found abandoned in a shopping mall parking lot. Inside were groceries and personal belongings, and under the car, investigators found traces of blood nearby. They also discovered items that appeared to have been part of a violent struggle. Her wallet and a single shoe lay on the ground. For 2 weeks, there was no sign of Cindy. Then, on June 8th, her body was discovered in the backyard of an abandoned house just over a mile from where her car had been found. She was fully clothed. Her hands and feet were bound behind her back, with black nylon stockings, and another stocking was tied tightly around her neck. An autopsy revealed lethal doses of morphine, diazepam, and other drugs in her system, enough to kill several people. Despite the bindings and the drug overdose, there were no clear signs of a struggle. The drugs had been ingested and injected, raising immediate questions about how she could have tied herself up afterward. But the knots, though tight, were determined to be ones she could have possibly tied herself with great effort and planning. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of restraint marks suggesting she had been forcibly tied, and no fingerprints or foreign DNA at the scene. The official ruling, cause of death, not determinable. Investigators couldn't conclusively say whether Cindy had been murdered, taken her own life, or staged a suicide to look like a homicide. Following the discovery of Cindy James's body, public pressure and lingering questions prompted a formal coroner's inquest in 1990. The proceedings lasted 40 days and included testimony from 89 witnesses, including police officers, medical experts, psychiatrists, friends, family members, and former colleagues. It was one of the most extensive inquests in Canadian history, and yet it produced more speculation than clarity. The inquest revealed the complexity of Cindy's life and the deep divisions in how her situation had been interpreted. Police officials testified that they believed Cindy had staged the harassment incidents herself, citing the lack of physical evidence, the suspicious circumstances surrounding many of the scenes, and the psychiatric evaluations pointing to emotional instability. Several officers argued that her death was likely the final act in a long pattern of self-endangerment. On the other side, Cindy's family and supporters insisted she was genuinely terrified and being stalked. They argued that no one would go to such extremes, cutting herself, injecting drugs, and tying herself up without real danger. Her parents, in particular, were adamant that she was murdered and had been failed by a system that doubted her instead of protecting her. Psychiatrists and mental health experts offered divided opinions. Some supported the theory that Cindy may have been suffering from a dissociative disorder or some form of psychosis, possibly causing her to believe she was under attack when she wasn't. Others were less certain, suggesting her mental state, while clearly fragile, didn't fully explain the physical evidence in many of the incidents. A few even entertained the idea that she was both victim and fabricator, creating some situations herself, but also possibly being manipulated or harmed by another person. Despite weeks of testimony, there was no smoking gun, no witness who could definitively link a suspect to her death, and no forensic evidence to resolve the debate. In the end, the 5-member jury returned an open verdict. Cindy James had died by an unknown event. It was a carefully chosen phrase, acknowledging her death was neither clearly suicide nor provable homicide, and leaving the mystery officially unsolved. The inquest didn't provide the closure many hoped for. Instead, it solidified Cindy's case as one of the most haunting and ambiguous true crime stories in Canadian history, a case where the truth remains just out of reach, suspended between possibility and uncertainty. The mystery of Cindy James's death has given rise to a range of theories, each with its own logic, its contradictions, and unanswered questions. While the official inquest left the case unresolved, that hasn't stopped investigators, experts, and the public from trying to make sense of what happened. Theory 1. Suicide. One of the most prominent theories is that Cindy took her own life after years of severe psychological distress. Supporters of this theory point to her long history of anxiety, possible depression, and reports of self-harm. Psychiatric evaluations hinted at deep emotional turmoil, and some experts believed she may have been suffering from a personality disorder or even a form of attention-seeking behavior rooted in trauma. They argued that her death was a final, carefully planned act of suicide, staged to look like a murder, possibly to validate years of feeling disbelieved. But critics of this theory questioned how she could have physically bound herself in such a complex way, especially while under the influence of a lethal drug cocktail. Theory 2. Murder. Those who believe Cindy was murdered point to the escalation and duration of the threats. They argue that no one would orchestrate such a complex and terrifying hoax over 7 years without help or outside involvement. Some believe Cindy's ex-husband, Dr. Roy Makepeace, may have played a role, especially given that Cindy had named him as a possible suspect at one point, only to later retract the claim. Others think a stalker may have been involved, someone who remained undetected due to police oversight or cunning. But again, this theory lacks hard evidence. No DNA, no witnesses, no clear suspect ever emerged. Theory 3. Dissociative identity disorder. Another, more controversial theory is that Cindy may have suffered from dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. Under this hypothesis, Cindy may have unknowingly staged the events while in a dissociated state, believing fully that she was being attacked while actually acting out her own trauma. While DID is rare and often misunderstood, some psychologists believe the complexity of her case and the mixed nature of physical evidence could be explained by a severe psychological split. Still, there's no formal diagnosis of DID in her medical records, and this theory remains speculative. Theory 4. Police incompetence or cover-up. Some observers have suggested that the real problem was systemic failure. They point to possible police negligence, flawed investigations, and a quick dismissal of Cindy's claims early on. There's also speculation, though no proof, of a cover-up, perhaps involving someone within law enforcement or another authority figure who had a reason to silence her. Supporters of this theory argue that the case was never investigated with full commitment because of early assumptions about her mental state. Whether out of bias, fatigue, or deeper corruption, some believe the truth may have been buried or ignored by those tasked with uncovering it. Each theory carries weight, but none have definitive answers. Cindy James's story remains a haunting enigma, a case that sits at the intersection of trauma, mystery, and failure from both the systems that were meant to protect her and the limitations of what we can truly know about the human mind. Cindy James's story has never faded from public consciousness. Instead, it has become a landmark case in Canadian true crime history, one that continues to intrigue, frustrate, and disturb. Her case has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, television specials, and podcasts, each offering different interpretations, but rarely any firm conclusions. Shows like Unsolved Mysteries and Crime Stories have profiled her case, presenting the haunting details to international audiences and ensuring her story remains in the spotlight decades later. True crime communities have kept the debate alive. Online forums, investigative blogs, and social media platforms are filled with theories and arguments from amateur sleuths and armchair detectives. Some comb through timelines, knot-tying techniques, or psychological analyses, while others focus on potential suspects or question how the police handled the case. This persistent fascination speaks not only to the mystery itself, but also to the emotional weight of Cindy's story, a woman crying out for help in a system that never fully heard her. Beyond speculation, the case has contributed to broader conversations about mental health, victim credibility, and systemic failure. Cindy's experience highlighted how authorities sometimes dismiss victims, especially women, as unreliable if their accounts don't fit expected patterns. Her case helped push forward discussions on how law enforcement approaches stalking, harassment, and psychological abuse. Since Cindy's death, there have been significant changes in how these cases are treated. Harassment laws in Canada have evolved, with greater emphasis on early intervention and victim protection. Police forces today receive more training on recognizing signs of coercive control and psychological trauma, although gaps still remain. Cindy James left behind no final statement, no clear explanation, only a chilling question mark that challenges how we interpret fear, truth, and justice. Her legacy is one of both tragedy and transformation, marking a turning point in how society understands complex victimization and the cost of not believing someone in time. Cindy James's case remains one of the most haunting and unresolved stories in Canadian true crime history. Whether she was the victim of a relentless stalker, a complex psychological struggle, or a tragic combination of both, the truth may never fully be known. What's certain is that her story continues to resonate, to challenge how we understand fear, mental health, and justice. If you found this video compelling, please give it a like, share your thoughts or theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most chilling unsolved mysteries. And make sure to stick around next time we uncover another eerie case from the Pacific Northwest, where a peaceful forest trail turned into the scene of a decades-old enigma that still baffles investigators to this day. You won't want to miss it.